It was a Wednesday afternoon when I saw her backpack lying in the cul-de-sac, alone, zipped shut, just sitting there like someone had placed it down on purpose. No child. No noise. Just that pink fabric catching the breeze. I knew that street. I knew that sidewalk. And I knew in my gut what it meant. Because 10 years earlier, my own daughter vanished the same way, and they told me she'd just run away. But I never believed it. Not for a second. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover the stories they tried to bury and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name's Kimberly Dean. I'm 52 years old, born and raised in Willow County, just west of the state line. I've lived here my whole life. Married young, raised my daughter Emma in the same house I grew up in. Same white porch swing. Same mailbox with the chipped blue paint. Back then, my days were simple coffee on the back steps, checking the garden, folding laundry, while the local news mumbled in the background. I worked part-time at the library. Emma rode her bike to school, always with her headphones in and her hair braided halfway down her back. We trusted the rhythm of the town, the way kids walked home from ball practice after dark, the way folks waved from porches but didn't pry too deep. Safe. That's what we believed. Not perfect, but safe. Until the day my daughter didn't come home. The police told me she'd probably had a fight, that she'd cool off and come back in a day or two, that girls her age 13 ran off sometimes. But I knew Emma. She was quiet, timid even. The kind of kid who apologized when she hadn't done anything wrong. She didn't just run off. They filed the report, gave me the flyer template. And then they moved on. Over the years, the porch swing stayed empty. I stopped planting marigolds in the spring. Neighbors stopped asking if I'd heard anything. But I never stopped looking. And then, 10 years later, another girl disappeared, 14 years old, walking home from a friend's house just 2 blocks from where Emma vanished. Her name was Madison Pierce. I didn't know her family, but when I saw her photo on the news, brown hair braces, soft eyes, my chest locked up like someone had punched the air out of me. Same age, same pattern. And once again the police said there were no signs of foul play, just like before. But this time I wasn't the only one watching. Detective Marisol Grant, she'd worked Emma's case back then. She'd tried to push harder, but her hands had been tied. Now, 10 years later, I saw her face on the news watching the same footage I was. She knew. We both did. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark at my kitchen table, a pile of old files and newspaper clippings spread out in front of me. The missing girl posters I had kept creased, faded edges curled from years of handling. Emma's name right there at the top. Then I started seeing the others. Sophie, Abby, Jessica. All girls, all taken in spring or early fall, always alone, always near farmland or wooded roads. I looked at the clock. It was past midnight. I didn't care. I grabbed my keys, got in the car, and drove straight to the station. They were going to listen this time. But before I made it through the front doors, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a neighbor. A photo. Madison's backpack. Found near the same cul-de-sac where Emma had last been seen. No note. No sign of her. I stood there on the precinct steps, staring at that image until my hands went numb. It wasn't just happening again. It had never stopped. I didn't wait to be invited in. I walked straight through the front doors of the precinct with the photo still glowing on my phone screen. Madison's backpack. Pink zippered, lying quiet on the pavement like it had been placed there deliberately. Almost exactly where Emma's shoe had been found 10 years ago. The officer at the front desk glanced up, already tired, already distracted. I told him I needed to speak to whoever was handling Madison's case. He gave me the same look I remembered from before, tight-lipped, polite, but distant. Someone will be with you shortly. It was the same script they'd given me when Emma went missing. This time I didn't sit down. I stayed standing in the middle of the lobby until a voice called out from the hallway. Kimberly. It was Detective Grant. I hadn't seen her in years, but I recognized her instantly. Same calm eyes, same quiet authority in her voice. She looked tired, like she'd carried too many names and too many faces that never came back. She led me into her office without asking why I was there. I didn't need to explain. She knew. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I laid the folder on her desk, the same one I'd carried all those years. Inside were the flyers, the timelines, the names. Not just Emma's, but others. I told her calmly as I could that this wasn't just another case. It was a pattern. Girls going missing, always young, always alone, always near quiet stretches of road that bordered farmland. Grant didn't argue. She leaned in. She took the file. She listened. That same night across town, Madison's family held a press conference outside their home. Her mother stood in front of the camera, her voice trembling, eyes swollen from days without sleep. "Please," she said, "if anyone knows anything, if you saw her, anything at all." Behind her, missing posters were taped to their garage door, fluttering in the wind. Madison's photo was the same one from the new soft smile, braces hair tucked behind one ear. I stood in the crowd with other neighbors, but no one spoke. Just nods, stiff hugs, and long, unsettled glances toward the tree line behind the houses. The kind of glances people make when they've started to question the town they thought they knew. Back at the station, Detective Grant pulled up the old case files. Emma's was first. Then Sophie Langley, 12, vanished 8 years ago. Jessica Thompson, 15, gone 6 years back. Abby West, 13, missing 3 years ago. All the same conditions, no forced entry, no ransom, no real signs of struggle, just silence. One moment they were there, and the next, gone. Grant had worked Emma's case. She'd pushed for a deeper investigation back then, but her superiors had called it a runaway. Closed it out within a week. Now she was looking at 5 open files, maybe more, with the same threads running through them. Girls last seen on foot, always headed home or running errands. Every time the trail went cold within 48 hours. Grant turned to her laptop and widened the search. Missing girls between the ages of 12 and 15 in the Tri-County area, rural locations, no known witnesses. Her screen filled with more names than she expected. That was the moment she stopped treating Madison's disappearance as an isolated case, and started treating it as the next page in something much worse. Meanwhile, I was combing through my own notes again. The news had started to cover the story more aggressively now, especially after I went on record during a local broadcast. I hadn't planned to. But after the first night, I called the newsroom and asked to speak on air. They were hesitant at first. Then I told them my daughter was Emma Dean, that she'd vanished the same way 10 years ago. They booked me the same evening. The host was respectful but skeptical. She asked if I believed the disappearances were connected. I said I didn't just believe it, I knew. I laid out the file on the table between us. Names, dates, photos, all in a line. The room got quiet. She asked why the police hadn't seen the pattern. I told her they had, they just hadn't wanted to. By morning, the internet had caught on. People were sharing the clip, comparing missing posters, swapping stories. A woman from 2 towns over said her niece had vanished in 2014 under the same circumstances. Another posted that she never let her daughters walk home alone anymore. A kind of hush fell over Willow County. Playgrounds emptied. School pickups were crowded with parents arriving early, locking eyes with every unfamiliar car in the lot. For a while, everything slowed down. People stopped waving. Doors stayed locked. Even the grocery store felt different, quieter, like the town had lost its balance. Then came the raid. Russell Tate, a convicted sex offender who lived a few blocks from the cul-de-sac where Madison's backpack was found, became the department's focus. He had a record. He lived alone, and he was convenient. The search team moved in after dark SWAT gear flashlights battering Ram. They dragged him out of his living room and tore the house apart. Grant was there watching the whole thing. Something didn't sit right with her. Tate didn't seem confused or scared. He seemed annoyed, like someone who knew he was being framed for something he hadn't done. They didn't find anything in his house. No trace of Madison. No clothing, no hair, no photos. Nothing. They kept him overnight, asked the same questions over and over. Where were you? Who saw you? He kept saying the same thing he'd been drinking at the dive bar on Baker Street. Said plenty of people saw him. By morning, they had to let him go. The station was already flooded with calls. Reporters asking why they had acted so fast. Parents asking why they'd wasted so much time. And then there was me back in Grant's office pointing at the list again. You're chasing the wrong man, I told her. Look at the profile. Look at the farmland. Look at how quiet he's been all these years. She didn't say anything at first, just leaned back in her chair and stared at the photos. She knew I was right, but her hands were tied. The department needed a name, a suspect, something to show they were doing something. And Tate was easy to throw to the public. But out past the edges of town, out where the roads go soft and the fields stretch for miles, something else was moving. Something careful. Something that had never needed attention to thrive. That was the week the sightings started. People claimed to see Madison everywhere at diners on the highway near gas stations. Most were false alarms. Some were deliberate hoaxes. But one name hadn't come up at all. Not once. Not in the forums, not on tip lines, not even whispered at the hardware store. Carl Hughes. I hadn't forgotten him. The man I'd bumped into at the farmer's market. Mud on his boots, plaid jacket. Smelled like earth and something older. He hadn't made eye contact, just muttered sorry and disappeared into the crowd. The vendor said he owned land outside of town. Didn't sell produce, didn't socialize, just watched. Too long, too still. And then, late one morning, a call came into the station. A farmhand named Miguel working the old Holloway property on the far edge of the county said he'd seen a truck parked near one of the barns. Not the owner's. Older model. Rust along the bumper. Always showed up late at night. And last week, Miguel said he thought he heard something. Faint. Like a small cry. Like someone was down there. Detective Grant took the call herself. She didn't wait for committee or clearance. She packed her bag, called a team, and drove straight to Holloway Farm. Because this time she wasn't going to wait until another girl vanished without a sound. The first barn on the Holloway property was empty. Just rusted tools, piles of brittle hay, and the smell of mice. The second looked the same, but it was the third, the one pushed back near the tree line with weeds curling around the base, that stopped us. It had a heavy padlock on the doors, fresh scuff marks in the dirt. Grant told the officer to cut it. The lock snapped clean with bolt cutters, and when the doors creaked open, the air inside was still and sour, like something had been trapped there for a long time. The flashlight swept across the floor, blankets flattened, food wrappers sun-bleached and torn. And near the far wall, scratch marks, deep and uneven, carved into the wood in frantic lines. Not tools, not animals. Fingers. Someone had been inside and they'd tried to claw their way out. I stood at the threshold while Grant moved in. My hands shook, but I kept them at my sides. There was a smell I couldn't name, old sweat maybe, or something stale from being underground too long. It felt like a space where time had stopped, like it had been waiting to be found. A woman from a nearby property came up to the tape line not long after we got there. Thin frame, older, her hands knotted in front of her like she was unsure whether to speak. She asked if this was about the truck she'd seen a few nights ago. Blue or maybe gray old model idling just outside the barn around midnight. She'd thought it was strange, too quiet, stayed too long. Nobody should have been out there that time of night. When Grant asked if she'd seen anyone step out, the woman shook her head, but she remembered the truck, said it made her stomach twist. That was enough. Grant didn't wait for a committee. She got on the phone with the county clerk and pulled every lease or rental tied to Carl Hughes going back 20 years. Barns, sheds, storage units, anything that could hold something or someone out of sight. Within the hour, it was clear. Carl had been leasing rural structures under his name or old family trusts for over a decade. Quiet places, far from town, out of reach. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again. I still had Emma's missing poster tucked in the back of an old folder. The edges were soft now the ink faded. I stared at it a long time. I thought about that barn, the scratches. I thought about the noise Miguel had heard that whimper. Madison had been in that space, maybe not long ago, maybe just days. But she wasn't there now, which meant she'd been moved. And if Carl had moved her, it meant she might still be alive. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't let myself hope too hard. But something had shifted. This wasn't a cold trail anymore. It had a pulse. Back at the station, things weren't moving as fast as they should have. Grant had been putting the pieces together, but the department still hadn't officially connected the cases. Too many gaps, not enough hard evidence. Madison was still classified as a missing teen with no sign of foul play. That's how they worded it, even after the barn, even after the fabric pulled off the fence line that matched the sweatshirt Madison was wearing when she disappeared. They bagged it and sent it to the lab, but that takes time. Meanwhile, the press was already running with a different name. Russell Tate. They'd plastered his mugshot across every screen in the county. Reporters parked outside his house. Neighbors stopped making eye contact. It didn't matter that the search had turned up nothing, that there wasn't a shred of evidence connecting him to Madison or the others. The moment his name was leaked, he was guilty in everyone's mind. By the time they released him, his windows were shattered, and someone had spray-painted the word Predator across his garage door. I walked into the station again the morning after. I wasn't angry. I was tired. I put the same file down on Grant's desk. She didn't flinch. She just looked at me like she already knew what I was going to say. I told her the department was wasting time. That every hour they spent circling the wrong man was another hour Madison might be locked inside another barn. I pointed at the list I'd kept. The years, the addresses, the farmland. Grant leaned forward. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. I could see it on her face she believed me. She always had. But she was up against a system that didn't want to look twice, didn't want to admit they'd missed it. Then the reports started flooding in. Parents calling in sightings of suspicious vehicles. People claiming to have seen Madison at a gas station on the interstate in line at a diner. Most were wrong. Some were made up. One woman said she saw a girl who looked like Madison at a rest stop outside of town, but the footage showed someone else entirely. The more the fear spread, the less anyone knew what to believe. And through all of it, Carl Hughes's name never came up. Not once. He wasn't on any list, wasn't in any headline, just a quiet man with dirt under his nails and barns full of silence. That week, Grant got a call from Miguel again. He'd noticed something strange at the Holloway property, a new padlock on a side barn that had never been locked before, fresh tire marks near the fence line, and he was certain now he'd heard something, small, muffled, like a child's voice buried beneath wood and dirt. He hesitated before making the call, unsure if he was just imagining it. But when he saw Tate's name on the news, something in his gut told him the danger wasn't in town. It was right here on this land behind these barns, tucked into places no one wanted to search. Grant didn't hesitate. She requested property records going back 15 years. Lease agreements, utility bills, tax records, anything that tied Carl Hughes to abandoned farmland. And that's when his name showed up again. And again. Sheds, units, barns, some in his name, some under family members long deceased. One location was still active, rented just 6 months ago, 15 miles outside Willow County. Remote, isolated, No crops, no livestock, just land and a structure and a man who had never needed to explain what he kept out there. When the report came in, Grant stared at it for a long moment. She didn't speak, just picked up the phone, her voice calm but urgent. Get a team ready, now. Because whatever was waiting on that property, whoever was waiting this time, they were going to find it. There's a kind of weight that settles in your chest when you know something awful is happening but can't prove it to the people who hold the keys. It's not panic. Not anymore. It's quieter than that. Heavy. Like trying to breathe through wool. After we found the third barn and Grant confirmed Carl Hughes had active leases across 3 counties, everything in me wanted to believe things would move quickly now, that they'd push through whatever red tape still stood in their way. But it didn't work that way. There were procedures, backlogs, command chains, and while the department debated whether or not the new evidence was actionable, I sat in my house watching the sun come up through the kitchen window, knowing another girl might be waking up in a place without windows at all. People started reaching out again after the news aired a follow-up on the barn search. Some were kind neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years, saying they were praying for Madison's family that they never stopped thinking of Emma. Others weren't so generous. One woman cornered me outside the post office and asked why I had to dredge it all up again. Said maybe if I'd let it go, the town could have healed. I didn't answer her. I just kept walking. Willow County liked its silence, its routines. The thought of someone using the farmland like a trap, it unsettled people in a way they couldn't quite name, so they turned away from it. Or worse, they blamed the ones still searching. Detective Grant was doing what she could, but I could tell the weight was getting to her too. She looked older than she had 2 weeks earlier, pale, drawn like she hadn't slept. I caught her one afternoon outside the station smoking a cigarette in the alley. I hadn't known she smoked. I asked if there was any progress on the other property, the one 15 miles out. She said they were working on a warrant. I asked how long. She didn't answer right away, just looked at the ash curling at the end of the cigarette and said, "Too long." That night I drove past Carl Hughes's property. I stayed on the main road, didn't slow down too much, just looked. His farmhouse was dark. One upstairs window glowed faintly, but otherwise it sat still too still. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful. I kept thinking about that moment in the farmer's market, the way he wouldn't look at me, the way he slipped away without a sound. I'd told myself maybe it was nothing. Maybe he was just odd. But then I thought about the scratches on the barn wall, the silence in the basement, the truck spotted near the Holloway property. If Madison had been there even for a night, then she'd been in his custody. That wasn't just suspicion. That was movement. That was proof. But still officially, we had nothing. The worst part was that the town had already moved on again. The fear was still there, but it had softened into something familiar. Parents picked their kids up in pairs. The grocery stores put up flyers about community safety. But beneath all that, there was this unspoken acceptance that no one was going to find Madison. The missing posters had started curling on the edges. The news cycle had shifted to something else. And even with the interviews I gave the files I turned over, the timeline was slipping away from us. I started staying up late again. I'd sit in the living room with the lights off and scroll through old articles. I wasn't looking for something new. I'd read every piece 100 times. But I needed to stay near it. Like if I let go for a second, the thread would snap. Grant told me one morning she'd gone back through Carl's childhood records. I remember how quiet her voice was, like she wasn't sure she wanted to say it out loud. She'd found school reports, CPS calls, old caseworker notes. His father had been violent. His mother left when he was 6. He'd spent most of his childhood being bounced between homes that didn't want him. One note said he used to hide in cabinets or under stairs, that he refused to sleep in beds. Another mentioned he had issues with order, that he got in trouble for rearranging desks, shoving kids whose backpacks touched his. When someone asked why it mattered, he said, "Because things need to stay where they belong." Grant said it like she didn't want to believe it. But it fit. It fit too well. The barns, the isolation, the control. It wasn't random, it was ritual. By the end of that week, even Grant admitted they weren't going to get what they needed through the usual channels. The higher-ups were hedging. They wanted more before signing off on a broader search. No one wanted to authorize force unless they had concrete proof that Madison was inside one of those barns right now. And we didn't have that. Not yet. Just fabric. Just tire marks. Just voices saying I heard something strange or I saw someone watching. It wasn't enough. That's when I started thinking maybe I needed to go back out there myself. Not to confront him. I wasn't foolish. But maybe to sit nearby. To watch. See who came and went. I told myself it was just curiosity, but deep down I knew it was more than that. It was the same thing that had kept me moving after Emma vanished. The same thing that kept me walking fields long after the volunteers gave up. Not hope exactly, but the absence of certainty. That unbearable middle ground where anything might still be true. I drove out just before dusk, parked a few roads over and walked the rest. It was cooler than it had been all week, the kind of chill that sinks into your sleeves. I stayed far back just close enough to see the outline of the barn and the side of the house. I waited. The light upstairs clicked on just after 8. Then nothing. No movement. No sound. I stood there until the light went out again around 10. Then I walked back to the car. Nothing happened. No one came or went. No sign of Madison. No reason to call Grant. But still, when I got home, I wrote it down. The time the light came on. The time it went off. I didn't know what I was looking for. Just that I couldn't stop looking. The next morning, Miguel called again. This time his voice shook. He said someone had been on the Holloway property the night before. Not the owner. Said he saw movement near one of the outer barns. A figure with a flashlight checking the locks. Said they didn't stay long, just enough to make sure things were still sealed. He didn't get a plate number, but he saw the truck. Faded blue. Rust under the tailgate. Same one Edna Caldwell had described the week Madison disappeared. Grant didn't hesitate. She told Miguel to stay clear, then called her team. Because now we had movement. And that meant we weren't chasing shadows anymore. Miguel's call wasn't brushed aside this time. Grant had already pulled every lease and utility record tied to Carl Hughes, but now she was looking closer timelines, proximity, the spaces between disappearances. When she called me that morning, I could hear the shift in her voice. Not urgency exactly, but purpose, like the pieces had started clicking in a way she couldn't ignore anymore. She said she was headed to the records division, asked if I still had the folder with the hand-marked dates I'd shown her. I told her yes. I'd been updating it every night. She asked me to bring it in. That was the first time I really felt like we were moving toward something not away from another dead end, but toward a thread that might actually hold. At the precinct, we laid it all out, my notes, her reports, satellite maps, weathered copies of missing person flyers. The first thing she circled was the Holloway property lease 6 months ago. Then she highlighted a lease from 3 years earlier, a barn 20 minutes outside town listed under the name of Carl's cousin. Then another one 7 years back in a neighboring county. I watched as she started drawing lines. Then she stopped. Her eyes landed on something I hadn't noticed. A handwritten rental form from a property in Jackson County. The name on the form was barely legible, but the address was clear. The date was off by just a few days from the last confirmed sighting of a girl named Jessica Thompson. She was 15. That barn had been cleared years ago. No evidence, no leads. It had sat empty like all the others. But now the timing didn't feel like a coincidence. Grant leaned back quiet for a while. Then she opened a file she hadn't shown me before. It was a copy of a personnel background request she'd made on Carl. His early jobs, the places he'd worked between his late teens and early 30s. One employer had submitted an internal write-up, just a few lines, nothing formal. But the last sentence caught both of our eyes. Employee shows obsessive concern over unused barns. Has padlocked and sealed multiple structures not under active lease. Reason unclear. The report was from 2011. That's the year Emma disappeared. Grant didn't say anything. She just picked up the phone and called dispatch. She asked for property coordinates cross-referenced with missing persons dates and any locations tied to Carl through known aliases. Then she paused listening. Her brow furrowed. She stood up. "There's one more," she said, already grabbing her jacket. 15 miles west. No livestock. No listed harvest. Registered under a Hughes family trust. Active lease. I asked if she wanted me to go. She told me no. That she'd call the moment they had eyes on the structure. But I didn't go home. I parked off Route 12 close to the old orchard lines and waited. I kept the car off windows cracked. The breeze carried the smell of dry grass and diesel. An old utility truck passed by once, but otherwise the road stayed quiet. I kept checking the time. A little after 6, I saw the first cruiser drive past, slow, unmarked, barely tapping the brakes. Then another. 20 minutes later, Grant called. Her voice was low. She said they'd found a structure. Barn sealed from the outside. No obvious signs of habitation. No power line running to it, just like the one at Holloway. They were calling in a warrant. I asked if she thought Madison could be inside. She didn't answer. Then she said, "I need to show you something when I get back. We met at the station just after 9. The room was quiet. Phones were still ringing, but fewer voices filled the hallway. Grant carried a manila folder tucked under one arm, didn't open it right away. She motioned for me to sit. Then she told me about a man she'd tracked down, a former ranch hand who worked with Carl about 10 years ago. Said he remembered Carl being particular about certain outbuildings. Wouldn't let anyone near them. Said they were for keeping things safe. When asked what he meant, Carl reportedly said, "They need a place to be." I give them that. The man hadn't thought much of it back then. Just figured it was one of those odd loner things. But Grant didn't think it was harmless anymore. Not with the padlocks, the silence, the girls who were never found. She opened the folder. Inside were photocopies Carl's journal entries pulled from a box at his last known residence. Most were about property upkeep, crop rotation, fuel storage, but one line had been underlined in red by one of the officers reviewing evidence. Tuesday replaced hay and blankets. 2 quiet, 1 anxious. That's all it said. No names, no dates, just that. Grant tapped the line and looked up. We don't know who those girls were, or when this was written, but we know it wasn't just about Madison. She slid the folder toward me. There's more out there. I didn't touch the folder. I just sat back and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. I asked if she thought Emma might have been in one of those barns, even if just for a while. She nodded once. That was it. Not a maybe. Not a we'll see. Just yes. Before I left, she told me they were getting ready to move on the last property, that the warrant had come through and she was heading out before sunrise. I told her I was going too. She didn't argue this time, just said stay in the vehicle until we clear it. I said I would. But we both knew I wouldn't. When I got home, I sat at the table like I always did. The folder was still in my lap. I finally opened it. I reread that line. 2 quiet, 1 anxious. I stared at it until the words blurred. Then I looked at the calendar, counted backward. Counted how many times a girl had gone missing in May or September, or the in-between months when no one was watching. I counted until the numbers stopped meaning anything. Then I circled one. A lease that hadn't been searched yet. The one they were heading to in the morning. And for the first time in a long time, I felt it just faintly, like the first hum of something starting to turn. A door that hadn't opened yet, but soon would. We left before dawn. Grant drove the lead vehicle, headlights dimmed, her eyes fixed ahead like she'd already memorized every mile. I followed in my own car a few vehicles behind the cruiser line, keeping low like she'd told me. The road out to the Hughes property, cut through farmland most people around here didn't even think about anymore. Just long stretches of pale grass and frost-bitten soil, scattered barns in the distance that looked more like skeletons than shelters. I watched the sun lift slowly across the horizon, not rising so much as revealing the quiet that had always been there. When we pulled off the main road and onto the gravel shoulder, everything around us changed. There were no houses, no passing cars. Just that single barn at the edge of a narrow clearing, weathered wood padlocked doors, a broken water line trailing off into nothing. Grant stepped out first. She didn't raise her voice or rush the others. Just pointed and started toward the structure like she'd done this before, like she knew what she would find. The team fanned out across the property. I stayed where I said I would, back near the tree line, hands gripping the steering wheel to keep them still. From that distance, I could see the officers surrounding the barn, scanning the perimeter, checking for signs of recent use, boot prints, tire marks, anything disturbed. One of them called out when they spotted the hatch. It wasn't visible from the front. It had been covered with brush and a warped sheet of tin weighed down with stones. I watched Grant crouch beside it, lift the edge carefully, then pull out her radio. Whatever she said, the team moved faster after that. They cut the lock, then paused. Not long, just enough to gather breath. The doors swung open. Flashlights disappeared into the dark. I got out of the car. I wasn't supposed to. I didn't care. I walked slowly toward the barn, keeping close to the tall grass. Grant didn't stop me. When she turned and saw me there, she didn't say a word, just gave a small nod and turned back toward the hatch. The air shifted. I couldn't explain it, but something changed the moment those doors opened, like the land itself exhaled or maybe braced for what was underneath. They moved carefully down the stairs, calling out softly, announcing themselves. The smell reached me before anything else. Damp earth, mold. Something else underneath it that made my stomach turn. The officers didn't yell. They didn't rush. They just kept their lights steady and their voices calm. Then came the pause. One officer called out just loud enough to cut the stillness, and then another voice, high-pitched hoarse. I couldn't tell what it said, but I knew what it meant. They'd found someone. I stayed outside. I didn't need to see it yet. Not until they were ready. It was 10, maybe 15 minutes before the first girl was led up. She couldn't have been older than 16. Thin hair, matted eyes, hollow. She blinked into the daylight like it hurt. Then another. Then Madison. Her face was the same as the photo on the posters, but smaller somehow, drawn tight. Jaw, clenched arms, crossed hard against her chest like she couldn't trust the air around her. An officer walked beside her, not touching, just staying close. She didn't look at anyone. Not at first. Then I heard the sound. A soft whimper. A kind of half-cry, half-coo. Grant came up next, slower than the rest. Her flashlight was still on beam, pointed downward. And behind her, shielded, clutching something against her chest, was another girl. Older, pale, gaunt. Her eyes were locked on the ground. Her steps were measured, and in her arms, wrapped in a towel and pressed close to her, was a baby. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. My legs gave out before my mind caught up. Grant reached for me, but it wasn't necessary. I already knew. I didn't need her to say the name. I knew that face. Even after 10 years, I knew it. It was Emma. She didn't speak when they brought her out. She didn't cry or run or call my name. She just sat on the back of the ambulance, rocking gently, arms still curled around the child like the rest of the world hadn't earned the right to see him yet. The paramedics kept their distance. They spoke in low voices, asked for her name, her age, whether she was in pain. She didn't respond to any of it. I stood just beyond the ambulance doors, not moving, not interrupting. I waited. Eventually, Grant came around and stood beside me. She said they were stable, all 4 girls. malnourished, weak, but alive. I asked about the baby. She shook her head. He looks healthy, a little underweight. Emma didn't say much, just kept whispering his name. Not sure if it's real or something she gave him in the dark. I asked if she'd said anything about Carl, about how long she'd been there. Grant hesitated. Then she said he told them they were being taken care of, that this place was safer than where they came from, that he moved them because people forget when they're scattered. We didn't talk after that. There wasn't anything left to say. Hours passed before they cleared the scene. Crime scene tape went up. Reporters were already circling the outer road kept back by deputies. Someone had tipped them off. I stayed at the hospital through the night. Emma was placed in a quiet room, no visitors besides medical staff and one appointed caseworker. The baby stayed with her. Every time someone tried to move him, she panicked. They let him stay wrapped in a hospital-issued blanket nestled against her chest. I didn't go in right away. I watched from the hallway. Her face didn't change much. She stared at the wall or at the floor. Her hands trembled. When she did speak, it was barely above a whisper. No one forced her to answer. She was given space. But eventually, she looked toward the door. Just for a moment. Then again. I stepped closer. She didn't flinch. So I opened the door, slow. She looked up. Eyes tired but present. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. And just before I sat down beside her, I saw it resting on the edge of the bassinet, barely visible through the folds of the blanket. A tiny bracelet. Worn. Faded. The name stitched in small blue thread. Eli. She didn't say the name at first. I don't even know if she could. But when I sat beside her in that hospital room, Emma reached down, gently, brushed her fingers across the top of the baby's head, and whispered, Eli. The sound of it barely carried, but I felt it land like a stone in my chest. I asked her if she wanted water or to rest. She shook her head. The nurses had already said she hadn't slept since coming in, but she wouldn't take anything. Not food, not sedatives, not even a blanket. She just sat upright in that chair, holding him like letting go might break something deeper than bone. It took 3 more days before she was ready to talk. And even then, it came slow. Piece by piece. A sentence here. A name there. I didn't press her. Grant and the hospital social worker sat in a corner most of the time, letting her lead. What she told us wasn't a single story. It was a series of small rooms, locked doors, nights without time. A man who wore different names depending on where they were. She didn't call him Carl, she called him Mr. Quiet. Said he never raised his voice, never touched her with anger. That made it worse somehow. He acted like they were guests, like they'd been invited. Emma said she was moved 3 times, once in the middle of the night, once when she thought the others were asleep. She remembered the shape of the barn roofs from inside the van. Said the sound of gravel meant they were getting close. She wasn't sure how long she'd been in the final place. Long enough for the seasons to change, long enough for Eli to be born and start teething. When Grant asked if she remembered how she got there the first time, Emma stared at the floor for a long time. Then she nodded. Said it was a woman who picked her up. Brown hair ponytail hoodie that said something about a softball team. Emma thought she was helping her find her way home. Said she'd seen her before on a porch talking to Mr. Quiet like they were family. That's when Grant stood up and stepped out into the hallway. I followed. She didn't say anything at first, just rubbed her forehead and leaned against the wall like the pressure inside her skull was starting to build. Then she said, "He had help." I nodded. We both knew what that meant. The disappearances, the timing, the way the scenes had been scrubbed clean. Carl, or whatever name he was using, wasn't doing it alone. Grant started pulling files that same day. She worked through the night. Every missing persons case tied to the original Hughes property. anyone who lived within 2 counties of his known addresses, female associates, co-workers, family. One name surfaced more than once: Margaret Sandler, former in-home nurse. No record of employment with Carl Hughes, but she'd lived next door to his mother before the old woman passed. Moved 3 times in 6 years. Always just a few miles from wherever Carl was. Registered a used car under a false last name in 2011, same year, Emma vanished. And the softball hoodie her niece had played on that team. Grant found the roster in a school district newsletter from the year Emma was taken. Margaret's name was listed as a volunteer chaperone. The next morning, we drove out to where Margaret was last listed: small white house gravel driveway. Not much to it. The curtains were closed, mail stacked under the box. When Grant knocked, no one answered, but the neighbor came out, said he hadn't seen her in a few weeks. Said she kept to herself, didn't make much noise. Sometimes she'd leave in the middle of the night, always alone. Grant asked if anyone else had come by recently. He mentioned a man. Said he didn't know his name, but he always walked slow, like something was wrong with his knees. Looked older than he probably was. Wore a cap pulled low. Grant asked to see the footage from his door camera. The man in the cap. Carl. Still alive. Still moving. Last recorded 4 days after the rescue. Back at the station, things moved fast. An alert went out. Marshals were briefed. Grant requested facial recognition hits from traffic cams and gas stations within a 50-mile radius. Carl's image pinged twice. Once at a gas station off Route 3, then again 2 hours later near the state line. Each time he was alone. No sign of Margaret. The car was registered to a storage facility 2 towns over, leased under yet another false name. When they searched the unit, they found shelves, canned goods, blankets, a mattress on the floor, a ledger with initials and dates, and something else. A tape recorder, old, dusty, but still working. Grant played it back in her office with the blinds drawn. The voice on the tape was low, calm. Carl. He was talking like it was a journal entry. Talking about keeping things quiet, not letting the noise in, and preparing the next space. He spoke about the girls like they were animals he'd rescued. Said the world didn't know how to care for them. Said she helped because she believed in the cause. "She was there the night I brought the first one in," he said. She watched the light go out in her eyes and didn't look away. We sat there in silence after that. Neither of us said it out loud, but we both knew this didn't start with Emma. It didn't end with Madison. And Margaret wasn't just an accomplice. She was part of the foundation. Later that evening, as I sat beside Emma's bed and watched Eli sleeping in her arms, I asked if she remembered anything else. She didn't answer at first. Then, in a voice so quiet, I almost missed it, she said, "He made us sing." I asked her what she meant. She said every morning, before we ate, said it kept the fear from getting too big. I asked what the song was. She hummed a few notes. It wasn't one I recognized. Just a few bars unfinished. Then she stopped and said, "When it stopped, that's when he left." I asked her if she thought he was ever coming back. She looked down at Eli, pressed her lips to his forehead, then said, "Not for me." The warrant came through just before dawn. By the time we got there, the sun hadn't fully broken the tree line and the grass along the fence was still heavy with dew. Grant stood beside the lead marshal, arms crossed, her jacket zipped to the neck. There wasn't much to look at from the road, a flat, metal-sided building tucked behind a tree line, no windows, one entrance, no signage, just a rusted gate and tire tracks going in. The same signature we'd seen before. Still, it felt different. He hadn't sealed this one up. There were no chains, no visible locks. That made Grant uneasy. She kept her hand near her holster as they approached the entrance, even though we all knew by now he was long gone. Inside, the smell hit first. damp wood mildew and something sharper underneath like the bitter trace of bleach clinging to old plastic. The barn was mostly empty. A few crates stacked against the far wall, a tarp balled up in the corner. But the back room told a different story. There was a cot, a plastic chair bolted to the floor, and along the walls, strips of paper tacked at eye-level pages torn from children's books. Some were laminated, others just curling with moisture. No names, no notes. Just pictures. A tree with a swing. A red bicycle on a sidewalk. A kitchen table with 2 plates and a dog beneath it. Grant stood there for a long time, not saying anything, her eyes scanning every inch like she was willing the space to confess. When she finally stepped back out into the air, she called it in. They marked the site, cataloged it, took samples. But the rest was gut instinct. This place had been used recently, and not just by Carl. The hunt for Margaret ended 2 days later. She was found in a small motel off I-67, sitting on the edge of the bed with a packed suitcase and a bus ticket to Utah folded neatly inside her shoe. She didn't resist. Didn't run. Just looked up and asked, "Is he dead?" Grant said no. That he was still out there. Margaret didn't speak after that, not during transport, not at booking, not even when they read her the list of charges. She kept her hands folded in her lap and her gaze low like the weight of everything had finally sunk in and pinned her there. Her lawyer called it diminished capacity. The DA didn't agree. She was indicted on 7 counts, including accessory to abduction conspiracy and unlawful imprisonment. The trial is still pending. What shifted everything was the tip. A woman in Tennessee who said she recognized Carl from a flyer posted at a gas station. She'd seen him 2 days earlier, said he was walking along the shoulder of the highway pushing a shopping cart filled with tarps and rope. Alone. Moved like he was injured. She didn't stop. But she took a picture. It was blurry, but it was him. The FBI took over jurisdiction after that. The interstate movements, the crossing of state lines, the volume of potential victims, it all pointed to a wider pattern. A coordinated task force was formed. His face was put on the most wanted list. Alerts were sent to shelters, bus stations, farm co-ops. But nothing came back. He'd vanished again like smoke and wind. Meanwhile, back home, things didn't settle so much as stretch thin. Emma and Eli moved into a safe housing program outside the city. Grant visited twice a week. I came when I could, but Emma needed space. She'd been caged long enough. She never asked about the others, not once. I think she already knew. A few of the families came forward, ones we hadn't spoken to in years. The mother of Jessica Thompson, the uncle of Maddie Ramirez. They brought photos, stories, tiny details only someone who had lived through the ache could understand. One by one, Grant sat with them, reviewed the leases, matched dates, verified handwriting. It wasn't closure, but it was something. There were 7 confirmed victims tied to Carl and Margaret by the time the task force released its first report. 3 survived. Emma was the only one willing to speak publicly. Her statement was quiet, careful, and clipped down to the essentials. She didn't talk about pain, or fear, or survival. Just facts, just a place, a voice, a song. When the press tried to push her, she turned away from the microphones and pressed her palm flat against Eli's back, shielding him like a barrier made of bone. The room fell silent after that. Grant handed off the investigation 6 months later, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. A new lead out west needed eyes. She left me her notes, every page, every red-marked corner, every map with dates and dotted lines. I kept them in a locked drawer in my study beside the old box of photos I'd carried since the beginning. Sometimes I'd open both, lay them out on the floor, see if any new pattern emerged. None ever did. But I still looked. You never stop looking when the person who vanished carried your name. The last official sighting of Carl was in New Mexico, A trail camera on a ranch caught a figure walking east at dawn. Too far to confirm, too grainy to trace, but the outline was familiar. The way the shoulders leaned, the tilt of the head. Grant said it was him. She was sure. The authorities didn't confirm. But I believed her. Still do. That was nearly a year ago. Since then, no new barns have been found. No new girls have gone missing under the same pattern. But I don't take comfort in that. Because people like Carl don't just stop. They shift. They burrow deeper. And sometimes they teach others how to hide the same way. A few weeks back, I got a call. A storage unit manager in Idaho found a lockbox filled with old toys, Polaroids, and a list of names. No date, no context. One of the names was Emma's. Another I didn't recognize. The handwriting was Carl's. Grant flew out the next day. I still get calls sometimes. Not often. But every now and then a number I don't recognize lights up my phone and I wait a beat before answering. It's never him. Carl's trail went cold somewhere between Nevada and silence, but it's usually someone who's still living in the long shadow of what he left behind. A detective following a thread, a family trying to name a girl in a photograph, or a counselor asking if I'll speak to someone who's just now stepping into the light after years underground. I always say yes, not because I have answers, but because I remember what it felt like to be the only one still asking questions. Emma's doing better. She and Eli moved into a small house near the edge of town, close enough for Grant to stop by on weekends, far enough to breathe. She's going to therapy. She's working part-time at a vet's office. Last time I saw her, she was holding a tray of dog treats and laughing at something Eli had said. It was a small moment. Ordinary, even. But it stopped me, because there was a time when I didn't think we'd ever see something like that again. Margaret pled out. 20 years, no possibility of parole. She never admitted to anything, never explained why. But during her sentencing, she turned to the courtroom just once and said, "He made it sound like we were saving them." Then she sat down, and that was that. No one clapped. No one cried. We all just sat there staring at the space she'd left behind. Grant transferred to the Western Crimes Task Force. She still sends postcards. Places I've never been: dusty back roads, border towns, wide sky stretched thin over nothing. She signs them with one line, "Still looking." That's her way. She never stopped. I don't think she ever will. As for me, I go slower now. I walk every morning before the sun comes up. Just around the block, past the same mailboxes and cracked sidewalks I've seen for years. But everything feels different. Not better. Not worse. Just clearer. Like the fog finally lifted and left behind what's real and what never was. I still keep the box, the one with the notes and the maps and the names of girls who never made it home. I don't open it much anymore. But I don't throw it away either. Some stories don't want to be forgotten. They wait. Quietly. Until someone's ready to hear them. So, if you've stayed with me this far, thank you. For listening. For remembering. For carrying a piece of this with you. Stories like this, they don't get solved in 1 hour or wrapped up clean. But if we keep telling them, keep saying their names out loud, maybe that's how the dark loses ground. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it so no name gets left behind.